The well-known YouTuber MrBeast, in his latest video that already accumulates more than 80 million views, shows us how he explores some of the most important ancient constructions in Egypt. He begins by saying that somehow you have unlimited access to all the great pyramids of Egypt. And there is only one way to have unlimited access to the pyramids, and that is by paying a good sum for it. This is a very important point that reveals a bit about the kind of people who manage Egypt's archaeological heritage, who, above all else, only care about money. We could see this on our trip to Egypt, when we visited the inside of the Great Pyramid, even sleeping inside the King's Chamber. In fact, it is not difficult for people with not very high resources to gain access to different advantages inside the pyramids as long as they bribe the right people. MrBeast does the same, but on a much larger scale, moreover, with the accompaniment of Zahi Hawass, the highest representative of Egypt's archaeological heritage, who is delighted to pose with MrBeast. MrBeast begins his tour inside the Great Pyramid, supporting at all times the false official story, saying that they are 4,500 years old, when everyone knows that there is no way to date these constructions, and there is much evidence that contradicts this dating. In the video, they mention that perhaps the sarcophagus of the King's Chamber may have contained the remains of the pharaoh Cheops, when it was never so. Ancient writings consider that Al-Mamun was the first explorer to enter inside the Great Pyramid. It is unknown how Al-Mamun knew the exact place to open the entrance that leads to the Great Gallery that ascends to the King's Chamber. Unfortunately for Al-Mamun, his initial success was of no use to him, since he left the Great Pyramid empty-handed. Or at least that is how it is recorded in history. In the writings, it appears that it was Al-Mamun who broke all the granite seals to access the chambers, but the pyramid was intact and empty. And of course, as we have explained in many of our videos, the purpose of these constructions was never to serve as a tomb, but Al-Mamun did not find what he was looking for. In fact, most of the mummies and royal tombs were found in the Valley of the Queens and the Valley of the Kings, never inside a pyramid. There are many evidences that we have mentioned in previous videos that support that the Great Pyramid never served as a tomb. A mummy was never found, nor hieroglyphics. Besides, it is too complex to be destined to a single use, since it involves numerous mathematical and technological problems. It is an example of a lost ancestral knowledge. MrBeast's group also visited the Osiris Well, a well excavated vertically in the bedrock, which reaches a depth of 30 meters spread over 3 different levels. In the deepest level, there is a granite sarcophagus in which, again, no human remains were ever found. These sarcophagi had a different purpose. Something very interesting is the narrow tunnel that MrBeast and a friend of his managed to get into, although there is barely room for one person. But who could dig such a tunnel in which there is no room to maneuver, not even to pass through? Then MrBeast and his group went to the Pyramid of Mycerinos, the smallest of the 3 pyramids of Giza, and shows the stone blocks that originally covered the facade. It is interesting to observe the details that these stone blocks have, very similar to the ancient constructions of Sacsayhuaman or Ollantaytambo in Peru, where you can see the same pattern with a bulge protruding from the smooth surface. No one has been able to explain how they could have used the same technique in places so far apart. This leads us directly to mention the discoveries of the French chemical engineer Joseph Davidovits, which we have already talked about in a video. He was able to prove that the stone blocks that make up the pyramids were created artificially. Then Zahi Hawass took MrBeast and his group to visit one of the hollows of the Great Sphinx, of course showing only what he was interested in. We have already talked about the different cavities of the Great Sphinx, Some of them were even intentionally covered. According to the knowledge that Arab scholars came to have, inside this colossal monument were kept maps of the earth and sky, a priceless knowledge that would constitute the great knowledge of a lost civilization that was the one who built the Great Pyramid, with the intention to serve as a stone bunker to preserve all scientific knowledge and important objects, in order to protect them from an unparalleled catastrophe that shook the planet, a great flood that changed the earth forever. After the visit to the Sphinx, the group headed back to the Great Pyramid. There they accessed a space in which very few people have been able to be. They reached the discharge chambers that are just above the king's chamber. Just there, Zahi Hawass shows the group the cartouche with the name of Cheops. For this reason, the Great Pyramid was attributed to this pharaoh, and therefore dated to that date. But this does not make sense, if in the Great Pyramid has never been found not a single hieroglyphic, not a single carving, nothing of information belonging to the dynastic Egyptians. How is it possible that was found, by chance, in the most recondite place of the pyramid a signature of the author of the work? In the 19th century, the English Colonel Howard Vyse made the suspicious discovery of this hieroglyphic cartouche. The truth is that the finding was involved in very suspicious actions on the part of its discoverers, so many considered that it was a great fraud. It was very convenient for Howard Vyse to point out that the construction of this great monument corresponded to a pharaoh, so he could establish the false theory that the Great Pyramid was built as a tomb. Nothing fits, and it does not take much research to realize that this smells of fraud, and that surely Howard Vyse was responsible for the appearance of this cartouche written on the block of stone, thus falsifying history and creating a story at his convenience. After this visit, the official story will now have a great diffusion. The lie will spread like a black stain that will cover the discoveries of many researchers who, for long years, have sought the truth hidden behind the most impressive constructions of Egypt.